Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Vic, and welcome back to another episode of Bitcoin in 30 minutes. And in this episode, what we're going to talk about is just an update on Bitcoin in December 2024. I am in my car right now, driving home for Christmas, and I thought it would be really nice to just create an episode while on the road. So if you hear some background noise, that's what's going on there. So Bitcoin, there's a lot going on in the Bitcoin world and in the so-called crypto world as well. Today, Bitcoin is at about $94,000 US dollars for a single Bitcoin. It reached an all-time high of $107 per Bitcoin, and it is corrected down to about $93,000, $96,000, something like that. I think it could correct down to probably $75,000, something almost 30%, which seems to be very traditional and informed from previous Bitcoin bull markets. One of the things I think is very interesting is this idea that Bitcoin has a regressive increase. In other words, the highs are lower in the future than they have been in the past. I think that is probably a good theory. It has played out so far in the last since Bitcoin in 2008. We used to see very high all-time highs where we would reach the so-called euphoria stage, and then now today we don't really see those very, very high all-time highs. We see much more kind of tempered all-time highs. Now, that being said, I think anything can happen in today's world, and I think if anything can happen, it could happen, and so you need to be prepared for it. So I think it's much more likely that we will see a euphoria type of high this time around, and this is my first comment on the election. I try not to comment on politics or the election in these podcasts, but I will make an objective comment of fact that Donald J. Trump has won the 2024 presidential election, and that Donald J. Trump has, in the past, been to a Bitcoin conference, particularly specifically the Nashville Bitcoin conference in 2024. And at that conference, Donald J. Trump said that he would be supportive of a Bitcoin reserve. Now, this is huge. Like, in other words, when I say huge, that's with a capital HUGE. Because if the United States, through the United States presidency and the U.S. Congress were to establish by law a Bitcoin reserve, that this type of legal action would no doubt cause a major demand shock and supply shock to the Bitcoin price. This could send the Bitcoin price multiplying, by 5 or 6, maybe even 7 in 1 week. So I'm talking about big increases in price, such that it would be almost impossible for normal people in the masses to keep up with the price appreciation. And I could see a world probably in the next couple of years where that happens. Now, there's a lot of commentary out there in terms of whether or not this is good or bad for the US dollar. I will reemphasize what I've said in previous podcasts, that Bitcoin is a global open source software technology that happens to come with a monetary policy of 21 million Bitcoins. And it is politically agnostic. This is a politically agnostic technology. And so whether or not it's good or bad for the US dollar, in terms of US dollar hegemony over the world, or US dollar, and when I say hegemony over the world, I mean US dollar as global reserve currency, I don't see how having by law a Bitcoin Reserve Act or some sort of Bitcoin Commodity Act would be bad for the US dollar. I suppose one could make the argument that by incorporating Bitcoin into a Treasury reserve asset like Fort Knox, like gold bullion or something like that, that what we are doing, or what the US has done in that type of scenario, is basically conceded that the US dollar needs a Bitcoin reserve asset. And so I'll just be very clear. I don't think that the US dollar reserve currency needs, quote unquote, needs or must have a Bitcoin reserve commodity. This is because the US dollar's currency and value is backed by confidence and the full faith and credit of the United States government, as well as other things. And I'll just kind of put other things in quotation marks there, because I don't want to comment too much about another theory that I have in terms of what actually backs the US dollar. Some say it's oil, some say it's military power. What backs the US dollar is much more complex than I can put into 30 minutes. I'll just leave it at that. But I think those who are on the internet that are saying that there's quote unquote nothing backing the US dollar, I think they're wrong. I think they're misinformed. And I think that they're very naive, to be quite frankly honest. I think that there are a lot of items and concepts and principles and technologies and partnerships and things like that that back the US dollar, and I'll just keep it like that. So whether or not the United States needs, as a necessity, a Bitcoin treasury, I think is inconsequential. I don't think that the country needs a Bitcoin reserve treasury. However, I do think that a Bitcoin reserve treasury would be a net positive for the value of the US dollar. And so I'll just say that again, because I said a lot of things before that conclusion, but the conclusion is I think that a US Bitcoin reserve treasury will be a net positive, i.e. a net good thing for the US dollar in terms of its value proposition throughout the world. Primarily because it shows the world that the US is taking this global technology seriously, and that the United States is being a leader in this space, and that the country is also has contemplated and is also considering the risks that could be associated with the technology. So will it happen in the 4 years that President Trump is in the White House? I think it could. I think it would be naive to think that it wouldn't happen, that there's no way and chance that it would happen. I think it totally could happen. Whether it's a shoo-in and whether it's a certainty, I think is up for debate. I think it's much more like 50-50 chance, to be quite honest, whether or not the United States will adopt the Bitcoin treasury, Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset. Now, that is a huge update to the Bitcoin space in 2024. We also have continued corporate adoption of Bitcoin. So we have Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy, which has very clearly been the number one stock in the world, basically, in terms of growth this year. I think at the last I checked, it had almost 1,000 Bitcoins, maybe more, 650 to 1,000 bitcoins, they have a lot, like a lot. We also have nation state adoption that is happening. So we have El Salvador, we have Australia. I think we're possibly having in the United States. We have Bhutan. There are a lot of other countries, smaller ones, that are getting on board and saying, "Hey, this is a really interesting commodity-like digital asset, and it looks like it has utility and usefulness insofar that it serves as a store of value over space and time. Oh, and by the way, you can send it on the internet at the speed of light. And so, we were ever invaded as a country, we could send it to a different country, like Sweden or Switzerland, for custodial safekeeping. And then when we needed it, we could just extract it out of the Swiss banking system, or whoever is the custodian of the bitcoins. So the Bitcoin properties as a global decentralized blockchain-based accounting ledger, and the principles of proof of work, which is the mining part of the Bitcoin system, is certainly coming into fruition. There has been a lot of talk recently in the last couple of months about quantum computing, and also AI. I think AI is a fascinating technology. I think quantum computing is totally a different conversation. But I'm definitely no expert on quantum computing. But I will say that the Bitcoin protocol in the open source software is set up to be improved, and there are quantum resistant encryption methods that can be added to the Bitcoin protocol. There's been a lot of talk about how Bitcoin is going to be, I suppose, canceled out by quantum computing, because quantum computing can break the Bitcoin encryption, because its ability to solve mathematical problems that would take, I suppose, penta years or septillion years, I think it was, that the Google article went. There was a Google article that recently came out that said, okay, we put Google's Willow quantum computer to the task, and it solved this math problem that would take an ordinary supercomputer, 1 septillion years to solve. And so, first of all, I think that's all propaganda. So I'm calling total bullshit on all of that. I don't think that Google has a quantum computer that, well, let me rephrase. My sense is that, yeah, so Google is so big that they're part of a larger narrative, part of a larger agenda to frame the thinking of people, okay? And this whole quantum computer article that came out, I think that's all part of the, hey, I'm going to scare you so you don't buy Bitcoin, put your money into stocks instead, type of framing of the agenda. I mean, once you get to be a certain age and experience, you totally start to understand that Wall Street, big banks have their interests, and they only have their interests. They don't care about you. They don't care about your money. They don't care about your growth or your wealth. And so if you're putting your cash and your cash savings to buy Bitcoin, that is a huge freaking problem for them. And you're not putting your cash into buying stocks that are already way inflated beyond historical values. That's a huge problem for them, right? Because they don't really own Bitcoin at this time. Well, they don't own most of it, but that's changing, because now the banks are finally starting to get on board with Bitcoin. But I think that the propaganda arm of the larger agenda is certainly being shown here with this article. Now, I think what will end up happening when it comes to quantum computing and encryption, just general encryption, which is SHA-256, which is the industry standard for hard encryption, is that it will be broken. All things are meant to be technology is such that eventually, certain technologies are deprecated and replaced by newer technologies. This is kind of the name of the game. Nothing lasts forever in our universe or in our world. And so if you do a little bit of research online, you'll see that the National Institute of Science and Technology, the U.S. National Institute for Science and Technology, has already come out and has put out a roadmap for incorporating quantum-resistant encryption. Okay, so quantum-resistant encryption will happen. I think it will be incorporated into the Bitcoin protocol, and it'll just be upgrades. I think that quantum computing is very, very unlikely to be used to hack into a Bitcoin address. Now, nothing's for certain, right? And folks who talk about this topic with quantum computing and Bitcoin, they often say, well, if quantum computing is hacking Bitcoin, then obviously we have bigger problems on our hands, because it's going to probably hack some of our federal agencies and hack our enemies and hack all kinds of banking structures and banking accounts. And so Bitcoin is the least of our problems when it comes to quantum computing. But it's interesting because you have the New York Times, who came out with the article recently. It's December 23rd, today, 2024. And so they came out with the article like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And, the Bitcoin price corrected, and that's fine. I suppose there was a little bit of fear there, or, let's make sure that if we're going to buy $100,000 worth of Bitcoin and buy a token for our progeny and for our heirs, that we do so knowing that it's going to be quantum resistant. And so the answer there is yes, it's going to be quantum resistant, as is everything else in the world is going to be quantum resistant. And so, plus, I also, going back to what I said earlier, is I think, the Google article is totally propaganda. But I think it's really interesting because I do think that quantum is definitely here. It's just that it's not as targeted and sophisticated and uniquely purposeful as I think the article made it out to be. From what I understand, there are some very big problems that still need to be solved, particularly keeping the atoms. I think they use atoms or some sort of structure to keep them cold enough so that they can represent 1 and 0 at the same time, and then do calculations with not with non-binary methods, but with 1 and 0 being a single state. But having those two ones, having the 1 and 0 stay at the single state takes a lot of energy because they have to be extremely, extremely cold. It's got to be extremely cold calculation, which seems kind of contradictory because when we do calculations in the binary world, those calculations create heat, right? So the computers create heat, and that seems to be counterproductive for a quantum computer. But anyway, so that's a Bitcoin update when it came to quantum. So I went over corporate, I went over state, I went over technology, I went over price, I went over the election of Donald Trump. I think that's about it. I think we're going to see a very exciting 2025. I think we will see $500,000 Bitcoin in 2025. I think it's more likely than not, but nothing's guaranteed. I think we do see we'll see more folks electing not to buy. People who are informed and people who are informed about Bitcoin specifically and who are convicted in terms of, or convinced rather, of Bitcoin's properties and its staying power and its store of value. I think that they're going to use Bitcoin to replace other types of purchases. So rather than buying stocks and bonds and investment properties, I think we'll see a lot more people just buying Bitcoin and holding it. I do not think that we're even close to what I call saturation or permeation or parity. So what I mean by that is Bitcoin is still very much a very young asset. is not even close to gold's market cap, which I think is $15 trillion. I think Bitcoin's like $2 trillion. Folks often say that, well, Bitcoin is going to replace gold, and it's going to replace art, it's going to replace investing in real estate, investment in real estate. People are going to say what they're going to say. I think it's the obvious answer is probably that Bitcoin is going to eat into different investable assets all at the same time. So you'll see the art market being eaten into, you'll see gold being eaten into, you'll see investment properties eaten into, and you'll see stocks being eaten into, and retirement funds as well. So I'll just be honest here. I mean, I took out some of my retirement money, paid the 10% penalty, and smash bought Bitcoin with it, primarily because I do believe Bitcoin could quadruple or pentuple from here. It's still very much a very young asset. I do not think that central banks around the world I don't think that they have truly accepted this notion that Bitcoin is the new store of value, and it will be this new store of value from here forward. And the reason why is because they continue to print all the cash that they want to print, and I do think that that will continue because there are a lot of promises that need to be made and need to be kept. So whenever the Treasury or whatever other sovereign debt or companies issue debt, you got to pay the debt back. And the only way that you can pay the debt back is through more cash. And so as we have more debt, we have more cash. And so it really becomes this symbiotic, circular type of scenario where more debt, more cash, more debt, more cash. And the only way to stop that is to do austerity, which is never, what I shouldn't say never, but which is often not a plausible way to go forward, because austerity implies that we're not going to have as much growth, and then people go hungry and people get frustrated, and then it gets into a political domain, and that whole thing unravels too. So I don't think austerity is going to happen. The only way we can do this is through growth and through efficiencies. I do think efficiencies will happen, and I do think growth will happen. Bitcoin is not a cure-all, I don't think, but I do think that it's here to temper some of the problems that we have in our modern society, particularly inflation, particularly a lack of savings vehicle, and particularly this idea that you want to be able to safe keep your property and move it at the speed of light throughout the internet and have it go with you wherever you go. So for those reasons, I think Bitcoin is certainly a great commodity that'll continue to have staying power. We'll see more companies, more nations, more entities start buying and holding it. I think even Texas has even put forward a bill to have a state Bitcoin reserve, which I think is extremely wise. Texas being a traditional legacy energy superpower, particularly with the oil and gas in Texas, I think it makes sense, and it aligns with Texas's values of independence and conservative values and energy to have a Bitcoin reserve treasury. How much? I don't know. But if it were to happen, I think that would pump the Bitcoin price another $10,000. So I think we could easily get to $500,000 Bitcoin in 2025, 2026. We could certainly correct back to 250 and then pump right back up to about $1 million or so per Bitcoin. The underlying legacy issues are not going to get corrected. I think it would be very difficult for them to get corrected without having massive ramifications throughout the economy that hurt people and hurt families and hurt business. So the status quo will remain the same, I think. In fact, it'll probably get even more inflated. But I've been wrong before in the past, so I could be wrong again. But so far, I think I've been doing pretty good in terms of my predictions in terms of Bitcoin. I bought the bottom at 3,000. I also bought the bottom at the most recent bottom, which I think was like 16,000, when Peter Zion said that Bitcoin had another $16,000 to go to zero because there was no use in that asset. I call bullshit on that because I think Peter Zion is a global political strategist. He was right about the Ukraine war, but that does not necessarily make him right about Bitcoin and its technology or monetary policy. I think he's a smart guy, but I just don't think he's right. I don't think he went on Joe Rogan podcast and said that Bitcoin has another $16,000 to go until zero because there's no use case for Bitcoin and it's a meaningless asset and it's an ideology. So I don't think that he was right about that. I think he was totally wrong, and now Bitcoin's at $97,000. So Michael Saylor is now going out into the real world and saying, hey, if you don't buy some Bitcoin, this is a $13 million opportunity cost for you. So he's extremely bullish on Bitcoin. So when I say $1.6 million per Bitcoin, I think that's conservative based on my personal conservative values and my personal conservative financial outlook in terms of what money means, what money is, what nations mean, what nations are, and what technology is in the 21st century. So I do think 1.6 is totally reasonable for a single Bitcoin, given that there's actually less than 21 million Bitcoins now. There's 21 million, but then Satoshi, his original wallet, has 1 million. And then Michael Saylor and some of the other big players, they have another 1 million. There's about 2 or 3 million that have been lost. So we're talking about maybe 18 million Bitcoins. On the open market, there's probably maybe like in a single day, at any given day, there's probably like 2 or 3 million Bitcoins up for sale. And so there are a lot of holders like myself that are just they're not selling at these price levels because we know what Bitcoins are really worth. We're worth about $1.6 million. And I think every single year that passes that Bitcoin does not reach the projected price is another 100 grand that I attach to my price target. So it used to be $1.5 million 3 years ago, but now that Donald Trump was elected, now my price target is $1.6 million. If we do have a Bitcoin reserve treasury, then my sell target for a single Bitcoin is going to be about $5 or $6 million per coin. So a lot of the way that history works and the way that time works is we just don't know what's going to happen. So, as the open market, the efficient market hypothesis proves, is that all the information is absorbed in space and time in a single second. And so right now we have all the information absorbed in space and time in a single second, and the sentiment right now is at about 97,000 per Bitcoin. If we have viable moves towards state adoption of Bitcoin, like in certain states in the United States, those numbers are just going to go higher and higher and higher because there's not as much Bitcoin to meet the demand. So then it brings up the other argument, like, hey, well, why is Bitcoin so special? And why can't we just create Bitcoin Part 2 or Bitcoin 2.0, or why don't we just use Ethereum? And I discussed this in the first and second podcast on this channel, is that Bitcoin is like the invention of electricity. You can't invent something that's already been invented. You can only improve upon it. And so in order to improve upon it, you just go to the Bitcoin open source software and you improve upon it. And you put a Bitcoin improvement proposal and see if other miners want to come on board with it. And so it's self-improving. So, and I don't think it makes sense to increase the Bitcoin token max because it is what it is. And so what you do rather is you start, or what the market does rather, is it starts to appropriately price Bitcoins in terms of what folks are willing to buy and sell them for. And so that is what we call open, efficient, true markets, capital markets. And I think that's really what we need today to kind of temper down some of the insanity in the world. hopefully it works out for humanity's best end. I think it will, but it's going to take some time. I think we're at a critical pivotal point, and that pivotal point is the election of Trump, part 2. I think we're going to see just a totally different United States than we have in the last 8 years. Something much more sound and concrete. That's just my personal opinion, and I'll just keep it at that. So I hope you enjoyed this segment of Bitcoin in 30 minutes, just giving you some updates on where we're at on 23rd December 2024, and as we move into the new year for 2025, and make it a great day.